Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the follow-up webinar. We're really glad to have all of you here today. As we go through, you're going to notice that it will just be me, Susan. Bonnie is actually on the road today, so she is not going to be able to join us as we go through. However, we'll talk through things and answer questions and go on with the webinar, and I'll look forward to having Bonnie with us when we're back together again in January. So as we get started today, just a couple of reminders from the last time that we were on a webinar, just a few webinar housekeeping items. So first of all, you should be hearing me either through your speakers or microphone and telephone if you called in. You can do a sound check if you need to do that. Just look at the different, up in the right-hand side and you'll see that it's listed there. We do not have handouts posted today. Those were sent out a little earlier, and if you did not receive them, just send me a quick little note via the question box, and I'll make sure that you receive those after the session is over with itself. Now, if you have questions, there's actually two options here. One, there's a question box, and all you have to do is type your question into that box and send it on to me, and I will respond to that. The other thing is that you can raise your hand during the Q&A period that we'll do a little bit later on, but a lot of times it's much easier if you just go ahead and type in your question itself so I can kind of keep track of those as we're going through. I see that some of you are sending in information at this point that you do have multiple people with you, so I will record all of those names so we make sure everybody gets credit for that. One of the things that we're going to do today is that we are going to have you do a little bit of talking. In fact, I'm going to ask some of you to contribute a little bit to this discussion as we go through. And when that happens, I will actually unmute your line so that you can talk. Not to put anybody on the spot, but I have to tell you that I am so pleased with so much of the information that came in from the reflection forms that I'm hoping that you'll be able to share some of that with everybody else. So as we go through, let's get talking a little bit more about the objectives for today. Well, for one thing, we're going to do some polling, which you'll see in just a minute how that works, but we're also going to discuss the results of the interim activities. We're going to be looking at what activity was selected, the response of some of your students, and some of the outcomes that you had. Plus, we're going to do a little bit of previewing of the next Institute session, which will be in January of 2016. Hard to believe, but that's just right around the corner. And then last but not least, we'll take a look at some new tools and resources for the classroom so that you have that information as well. So let's get started first by taking a quick poll. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a question, and all you have to do is click on the answer that you want to and that best fits you. So let's get started with one of those. And I'll start with this first question. So I'm launching the poll now, and what you're going to see is that this particular question is asking you which of the following interim activities you did in your classroom. And as we're looking through this, I see that we only have about 18% of you who have voted. So let's keep on going with that so that you can see how everything is working within that. And we'll keep going. We're at 70% now. And boy, as tangrams and nets are neck and neck as we're moving through here. Okay, so at this point, what we'll do, and I need to move that back just a moment, is I'm going to have you, I'm going to close this poll. I'm going to go back over here to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to share the results with you. We had 83% of you voting, and just take a look at what we have here. We actually have, at this point, 48% tangrams, 48% nets, and 5% of you who went for the Van Heel theory. It was really interesting as Bonnie and I were going through all of your reflection forms to see your responses in each one of those different areas and the ones that you chose to do. Okay, so let's hide that. And now we're going to come to another one. And this next question asks you, which of the following best describes your student's reaction to the activity? And so we're going to launch that poll. Were they excited to do something different? Were they kind of reluctant to try something new? Or were some of them a little less than thrilled? So go ahead and let us know what you think as you're going through. And I see that we're kind of close on this one, where some were reluctant to try, but they actually moved on and found out that they could do some things. That's really fantastic as we're moving through here. What we'd like to do, okay, it's 81% of you have voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share those results. So we have the 35% who were excited to do something different. We have 60% who were reluctant to try something new, but they actually were a little surprised that they could do that. And we had 5% that were less than thrilled. They'd actually just rather have a formula or something else that they could work with. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try another poll here. And this time, let me hide those results. This time, the question comes to you. Were you surprised by the students' reaction to the hands-on learning activity? And all you got to do is answer yes or no. Oh, we're going back and forth between yes and no, yes and no. Oh, and now the no's are coming on into it. You weren't surprised. But 41% of you have said, yeah, I was surprised because of how the students responded. So we'll go through in just a minute and we'll talk about why that may have been. So let me close and I will share those results with you so that you can see how this looks. So 43% yes, 58% no. Okay, so let's hide that one. And we have 3 more polls we're going to do. Now think about it for just a minute. Do you believe the activity helped students better understand the concept you were teaching? And again, it's just a quick yes or no response. Wow, as we're going through, we find that 92% of you, and I will close the poll now so we can share the results. 92% of you said yes, that you did think that it helped and students understand the concept better, while only 8% of you said no. And I did notice in going through some of the reflection forms that you did have some students who, as they were going through, they preferred to be on that side over there looking at some of the other types of things. They preferred to go through and actually be able to use a formula as opposed to what they had been doing. All right, 2 more questions. Will you consider using this or other hands-on activities in the future? Yes or no? And as we look at all of this, the yeses have it. In fact, 100% of you. Bonnie and I are so pleased with the reactions that we've seen from all of you who completed those activities and did the reflection forms, and just how much you enjoyed doing this with students, and also how you saw that it might make a difference for you as you're training and as you're helping your students gain their skills. So very pleased to hear that. And now we have one more question. And this one comes back to something we talked about in the session itself. Are you currently registered for the GEDTS monthly newsletter in session? And yes or no is your response. And okay, guys, we're going to have to get everybody up and going here with this, because as we're going through, we do have 1/3 of you who are saying yes, but we still have people who are saying no. So what we're hoping that you're going to be doing as we move on through is that more and more of you will be responding yes, because they are releasing a lot of new information from the GED testing service, and you don't want to miss out on that as an opportunity. So having said that, we'll continue on and move on a little bit. Okay, and I do have a couple of questions that have come in, and one of these is during the face-to-face, you said you were going to send an electronic copy of the handouts to us. Actually, there were electronic copies that were posted into through Edmodo, so we'll go back and talk about that again a little bit later. Absolutely, we'll make sure that that happens. Okay, let's hide this, and now we're going to come back over here and we're going to do a little talking. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask some of you, as I've gone through this, to actually share just a little bit of information with us about your results and how things went in terms of working with the students and doing the hands-on learning activities. And so as I've talked with you, I'm going to call on some people and I will unmute you at that point so that you can speak. So I'm going to start out, and Anna Adams, I'm going to unmute your microphone or your phone, whichever one you happen to be on. And I'd just like to ask you just one thing. You were talking about in your reflection form that your students had a really positive reaction to doing the hands-on activities. And one thing that struck me is that you said they enjoyed physically holding that math in their hands. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Anna?
I can try.
Okay.
Truthfully, I wasn't for sure if my microphone was going to work. It's been kind of years since it's been plugged in. I actually chose to use the nets because a couple weeks prior to this, we had actually been discussing surface areas of shapes, and especially the cubes and the rectangular prisms, but it was one of these, I wasn't for sure if they actually grasped the concept. So when we were in our sessions and the nets were there, I was like, this would be a perfect opportunity. And they were like going and counting the sides. They were going side. I
Mm-hmm.
for sure know what this other side's going to be, because now I'm not looking at just a shape that's on the paper. Turn it and see in with my own eyes that those actually match up.
And
And I have two students in particular that are traumatic brain injury students, and they have no short-term memory.
okay, okay,
And they are actually, we teach a math block, so I actually get 2.5 hours with these students for math.
okay.
And they were like, they couldn't remember if they'd ever done activities like this before, but they were able to take it with them home so that they could see it again every day instead of questioning whether or not they had done it. And it wasn't a worksheet anymore.
Absolutely. Anna, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's the thing, that's the key to so much of what's going on with our students, is that they don't have that opportunity to really, and I liked the holding math in my hands, to be able to do that so that it's very real to them as opposed to our worksheets, which are so abstract. And so I really appreciated that comment that you made. So thank you for sharing that. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask if, let's see here, if I could have Holly Campbell. Holly, are you with us? I'm going to unmute you. And this was one of the things that, and hopefully you'll be able to share a little bit better with us. Um, One of the things that you made a comment about in your reflection form was that as students were putting shapes together, they were commenting on different characteristics of those shapes. Could you talk a little bit more about that to us? And you should be unmuted at this point. Oh, Holly doesn't have a microphone. So she, so I guess Holly will not be sharing that with us. However, what I will do is say to you that one of the things that Holly had made a comment about was the fact that that her students were drawing their own nets. And so as a result, they were able to view all different sides. And so they enjoyed having the opportunity to work with that. Um, it was really about helping students to understand, the differences in those different types of shapes itself. So Holly, I thank you for your comments, even though you can't share them with us at this point because you don't have a microphone. From here, I'm going to go to, and we're going to hope that Jackie Robertson, Jacqueline, um, can you talk with us a little bit about yours? Because one of the things you said is that you could watch the aha moment occur.
Yes, can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank you.
Great, everything's working. Yes, you could see um, the look on their faces, when they realize that, say, you're going to paint a child's toy box. You aren't going to pour a can of paint inside the toy box. You're going to cover the surface of the box with the paint.
Mm-hmm.
And they could actually, with the rectangular prisms, they could actually picture that toy box. That toy box was what I brought up to them.
Mm-hmm.
They want to, when they think about surface area, they think of volume so many times. And I said, okay, are you going to pour the paint in the toy box to give us the gift? No, And so they were able to, and probably they'll picture that notion in their minds, but they could actually hold the boxes in their hands and open them out and see the difference between the surface area and the volume. Of course, they already had a certain level of geometry skill before we got there.
Right, right. And I noticed too that you made a comment about that you had a bunch of different cardboard boxes, and you even brought out the old oatmeal boxes as cylinders, so they actually had some
Yes.
of those that they could work with.
Yes, yes. And I know that that online program, of course, don't ask me to name it because I can't remember anything, that actually shows it opening up is quite useful. But when they actually can take the box themselves and, slice down the edge of the cylinder and cut around the circles for the top and bottom and see that it's the area of two circles in the area of a rectangle, that has more impact, I think, than watching the picture unfold when it's
Oh,
actually in the hand.
I would absolutely agree with you that being able to, and I think you said it, that they could construct, deconstruct, reconstruct. They could do all those things by having those different materials there. And so kudos to you, because I think that's such a great thing, and it always is great when we can see that, aha, I got it. I got
I
it.
will tell you, I'll tell you one more quick thing.
Sure.
There is a question on one of the TABE tests that shows a diagonal slice through a pipe, and it says, what is the resulting shape? And it's an oval. And I had students missing that question on that test probably for years before it finally occurred to me, cut a pipe and show it to them. And so now I keep that pipe, because I have to bring it out sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that this does make a difference, and it makes a difference not just on the GED test and what they're doing there, but they're going to walk away now with these concepts forever. I mean, they got it now. And that's the really important thing. But Jacqueline, thank you so much for sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, I see Jill Parker has her hand raised. So Jill, I'm just going to unmute you and see, is there a question? Jill? Okay. All right, then we're going to go on. And the next person I'm going to ask to talk just a little bit is Ken. Ken Corso, I'm going to unmute you, and hopefully you have a microphone there or you're on the phone. But one of the comments that you had made is that your students, that they really got into this because they're primarily kinesthetic learners. So tell us a little bit more about your students and how things went.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm using the laptop's mic, and I wasn't sure. I tried this out in my accelerated opportunities welding class, and this is a group of young men who are really not academically minded. They're more hands-on. They want to, their answer to everything is to throw a tape measure across it rather than calculate the distances and things like that. So for them to manipulate, I had paper cutouts for them to be able to manipulate them into the right shape, and then to do the volume part of it, and then to lay them out open to do the square the area.
Mm-hmm.
I think was helpful to them. They usually construct things out of pieces that aren't bent. Although if they're working with thin enough metal, they could end up having to actually build something from a net so they could see the use of it. And I think that's important to them to be able to see a practical application of it as well as to actually put their hands on it.
Well, and there was one comment you made about one of the students who I think kind of surprised himself because, all of a sudden he's making observations about, the length of a rectangle and the circumference of the circle, and,
he's usually a quiet young man, and he just all of a sudden blurted out that we're discussing the rectangle formed by peeling the label off a can. And with the net laid out like that, they still had trouble coming up with the length of the rectangle. And this guy just sat up and said, it's the circumference of the circle, and I think he surprised himself as much as the other guys. He typically doesn't answer much in class, and he just all of a sudden had an epiphany.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's what sometimes when we least expect it, students do respond. And, I think, too, you're right, that sometimes it just takes them off guard to think, oh, did I really say that as they're going through? So thank you, Ken, though. I really appreciated that. And I was so glad to see this coming out of a program where you're working with, students who are working with welding. I mean, this is all about getting skills and being able to transfer those skills into areas that they can use in life. And, that's a great one. So thanks a bunch for helping us here and for sharing with us.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we did have to tell them that you couldn't actually weld something that was a solid shape. It will explode. The air inside will heat up, and the three-dimensional object will explode. So
that's true.
You have to remind them not to do that.
Well, see, they're another lifelong learning moment as you're going through. But thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. And at this point, I'm going to ask Kurt. Kurt, if you don't mind, and I'll unmute you as well. You were talking about the fact that students that couldn't get that correct answer using the formulas, this gave them another way to look at things. So tell us a little bit about how things were going with your students.
Well, they were having difficulty following the formulas on the GED formula sheet for surface area, which I can't blame them, because I have trouble following those sometimes. It doesn't seem like there's a rhyme or reason as to how they're put together.
Absolutely.
And so by using the nets and being able to break it down into the individual components that make up the three-dimensional shape and the individual areas, the students that couldn't use the formula at all were able to break it down into simpler formulas and be able to find the overall surface area by adding the individual pieces together.
And I would imagine that for those students who've been struggling with the idea of surface area and trying to, because those formulas are a little intimidating to begin with, that they really were, like probably surprised, just like with Ken's students, to say, oh, wow, I can still do this, and I don't have to depend on this thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I tell them all the time that there's 101 different ways to get places in math, and you got to find the one that works for you. So if the formula doesn't work, break it down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that, and thanks for sharing with us. I'm going to ask now, I'm going to move down just a little bit and see if Linda Parsons. Linda, I'm going to unmute you, and hopefully you do have a microphone with you. One of the things that kind of it didn't surprise me, because I've had students who do this too, but one of the things I noticed that you said is that you had one of those students who gives you that, I can't do these, and then all of a sudden she was the first one to identify the shapes. So could you tell us a little bit about that student and how all of that came together? And Linda, we have you unmuted. And maybe Linda can't talk with us. We'll see. If not, then we'll come back. Maybe we'll check in just a few minutes. I'm going to move on here very quickly to, and I was looking to see Rachel. Rachel, you are working at a correctional facility. And one of the things that you said was that you really liked pushing your students to think. Could you talk to us just a little bit about that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Yeah, technology was one of the last things that we got into the correctional facility, so hands-on was one of the things that we've, tried to incorporate a little bit more of. And
Mm-hmm.
in the correctional facility, the students seem to be a little drab, maybe like they're forced to come to class.
Ah, gotcha.
It's, pushing them past, what they think their ability is, been a struggle. So this activity that I did really did that. You could see they didn't want to in the beginning, but then once a couple of them had figured it out, then it come a little bit competitive. And that's something you often see in the correctional facilities.
Absolutely. And it gets them motivated and going. I really think it does come down to the fact that, we still have so much of this in our adult ed programs with students going, I can't do this. I can't do this. And then when they realize somebody can, well, it just kind of pushes the others to say, well, if he can do it, I can.
Yes.
So is this something that you'd be able to do with some other things as well? Is your site open to doing more of the hands-on learning activities?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. And, the nets are something that's coming up. I guess the downfall to the correctional facilities is even though the students are forced, you don't always have a class, so it's hard you can prepare all you want.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what's going on in the facility or students being transferred and things like that. So a lot of other hands-on things I've tried to come up with, and nets would be one of them, and I think that they would really enjoy that too.
Good. That's good to hear because you are right. It's not just we always talk about, well, corrections has a captive population and there they are, but that's not really true. There's so many different things and situations that you really don't have control over. So, so I'm glad that things worked well for you and for your students. So thank you, Rachel. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And at this point, Scott, I'm going to ask you if you can talk a little bit to us. Um, One of the things that you said in your reflection form was that the students enjoyed the activity, but they did struggle some with turning that drawing into a three-dimensional shape. But one of the other things you said, it gave them a chance to have a hands-on activity, and I need to do more of this. So do you see yourself incorporating more types of hands-on learning in the classroom now? Scott, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Oh, I see I got a question from you. Okay, you have a mic. Okay, I've unmuted you. So can you talk to us a little bit about your situation? And you may have to unmute your mic from your end. Okay, it seems that we're having some difficulty with Scott, and him being able to talk with us. So let me go and do one other thing, and I'm going to move to, and I think she's with us, and that is Tammy Frazier. Tammy, you talked about using the tangrams and working with fractions. I've unmuted your mic now. Could you talk to us just a little bit about how you went about this process with students?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I'm surprised. Yes, I used it for fractions because it seems like I don't care what the student is, I always have to go over fractions 100 times. So I wanted something different. And at first I had a couple people a little reluctant on using them. We played with them first and did some pictures. Some people just like us had a hard time doing it, including me. And then we used, I looked up on a website and found some excellent questions to use along with it for asking them questions like comparing how many small triangles would cover the large square, what percentage. I use percentages and I use fractions also with
Okay.
it to see what percentage fit in there, what's the fraction for that. But it just made a lot of people, it's always better when they can see things, and the fraction bars work sometimes, but this is more hands-on, that they can fit it into each other better, and they enjoyed it more than the fraction bars.
Okay. Well, a little bit more challenging in some respects, but at the same time, I think just having that opportunity to work with different kinds of shapes and but still, in the midst of having quote unquote fun, they're actually, can let some of that anxiety go too. That can make a difference as they're working through with all those different pieces.
Yeah, it makes fractions a little real for them, and it was just more fun to do.
Okay, and I appreciate that because, we have to keep in mind that we're working with students from all different levels here. We've got them, from those, and, I can't tell you how many teachers I talked to and back in the day when I was in the classroom itself, how many times, where did I have to start? Fractions, because students, that was an issue for them. They weren't able to get past it. So good to know that, in being able to work from this angle, that helped as a part of that process. So Tammy, thank you for sharing that. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate your work and keeping at those fractions as we keep moving through. So I just called on a few of you today, and I really appreciate all of you who were able to share the information going through. Um, One of the things I want you to know is that Bonnie and I so appreciate the efforts that you put into working with your students and responding back on the reflection form. You've given us some really good ideas and some good feedback, and it was such a positive experience for us to hear about how things were going. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because we have another workshop coming up, and yes, it will be in January, and between then we get to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas. But let's talk a little bit about that and where we're going to be from there. We're going to really delve into problem solving, because at the bottom of all of this stuff is that you can get students to do calculations and computations, but if they can't translate that over into how they address real life math situations, then it's not going to help them any. And if you think about how math impacts you, how much you use that every day and at home and at work, our students are in the same situation. So as we move on to this next one, the next workshop, we are going to talk about the fact that many of our students, the issue here is reading skills. They can do much of the math itself. However, they can't translate math problems and know how to solve them. So we're going to talk about two things that are really important in that process, and that's modeling and it's scaffolding. And modeling from a standpoint of us as instructors having to walk them, talk them, show them how we think through the process, and also how we build, scaffold that instruction as we're moving through. And just as with this past one, there will be strategies and activities and resources that you can use in the classroom. So you'll have that. But I wanted to lay just a little bit of a foundation today in the little bit of time that we have left, because the question comes up, well, what does reading have to do with math problem solving? And the reality is it's everything. If you can't read those words, if you are looking at a math textbook and you can't decipher what that explanation is telling you, you it's not an issue of you don't have math ability. It's the fact that you probably just can't read the math textbook. You can't extract the information. And the research is pretty strong on that as we're moving through. I want you to take a look at that last bullet down there, that main one, where students say the best means of learning math are hearing an explanation, asking someone how to do something, or being told what to do. In essence, what happens with many of our students when it comes to math problem solving is that they look at things and say, okay, you just tell me what to do. And they lay that responsibility on you as the instructor, as opposed to taking on that responsibility to themselves. And so we have to make some changes here. We've got to get them that this has got to be student-centered. It can't be coming out to the teacher always. I want you to, if you just kind of take a look at that graphic on this page, what happens with math textbooks is that there's this real density of ideas. There's so much crammed into so little space. And they're multiple meaning words, so it's not just about being able to know one definition of a word or but it's how it impacts in the context of that problem. And then, of course, let's add to that abstract symbols, not just words, but symbols, and the understanding of pictures. For example, looking at the nets and looking at the different things, at the different figures that we talked about, and being able to understand those. When it comes to reading, just think for a minute about your math workbook itself within the classroom. What the research has shown is there are more concepts per word, per sentence, and per paragraph than any other type of textbook. We may think that, oh, wow, the physics book or the chemistry book or something else is really complex, but when it comes right down to it, math jams a lot of stuff into a very little space. The other thing is, of all the books, these are the ones that are usually written above grade level, so that creates some real issues for students. And what do our students do? Well, if they have an explanation, chances are really good they'll skip right over it, and they'll look at the sample problem, and then they try to figure out what has been done. So think in terms of that. It's kind of like, okay, I really needed the directions to put that bicycle together, but instead I just looked at the picture, and now I wonder why I've got these 2 extra parts left over. In part because I didn't look at all the directions that went with that. And our students have to be more proficient at decoding words, numbers, and symbols. So we're going to spend a good bit of time in working within that particular area itself. We're going to talk about math vocabulary. There is a lot of math vocabulary, and our students have to have that understanding. But we're also going to look past, again, get past the rote memory and more into the conceptual knowledge. But the last thing in that list right there is that we have to really encourage perseverance. Your students, my students, everybody out there, what happens is our students try to solve a problem, and if I can't do it the first time, I can't do it. But we've seen in the interim activities that you did how many students thought they couldn't and then found out that they actually could. So we're going to work with that. There's some things that we need to make sure that our students know, and one of them is that math is not about doing things fast. And it's not about reading a math book fast. As they say, speed kills. It's not a magazine. This is something where students will need to read and then reread a problem and do that close reading. They need to not ignore those diagrams that are there. I can't tell you how many times I would have students say, but the answer is not here. And you go through and you say, well, yes, it is. It's in the diagram, or it's in the graph or table. And you can't just read. You have to do it as you go. So it's really about getting those students to slow it down some as they're moving through, and to understand that sometimes the magic happens between the lines. It's being able to infer as they go through. My students weren't always the greatest when it came to following instructions. They didn't always go through and truly find out what a question was asking them to do. So we've got to put more emphasis as we're writing, as we're working with students. And one other thing that we're going to have to do as well is really have students do some writing when they're solving math problems. And I think you'll see in some of the activities that we do that students don't expect that they're going to have to write when it comes to math. All they got to do is just do the computation. Well, we need to learn more about the thinking process itself. A number of different things. Again, you can go back and take a look at these, but textbooks, you know, they have various words and symbols have very specific meaning. They're really set up in an expository pattern where they have a statement, they have an example, and then they have an explanation. So we have to work with those. One other thing to keep in mind, and this is something that I'd like for you to be thinking about between now and January, and please feel free to bring into those workshops in January any samples that you may have of different graphic organizers or processes that you use for problem solving. In fact, if I can set something up on Edmodo, and if you want to post any of those there, you certainly can, because one way doesn't work for everyone. And so we'd like to have as many different sources of information out there as possible. So if you have a special strategy that you use for problem solving, then please be ready to share that when we come in to meet. A couple of things as you get ready for that next face-to-face workshop. There is a YouTube video that we would like for you to go out and watch, and it's just called An Easy Way to Solve a Problem video. It is on YouTube, and I think it's about 6 or 7 minutes long. It's not very long at all. But if you would, take a look at that. And then also, one of the documents that you received as part of this webinar itself was from was mathematics teaching for understanding, reasoning, reading, and formative assessment. And I know that sounds like a lot of words there. However, it is about 16 pages long, but I think what you'll find as you're going through is it does lay out some very interesting different points of how we can help students develop their problem solving and reasoning skills. This, of course, as with so much research that's out there, was written toward K-12. However, there are quite a few things that we can do. One of the things that I do appreciate is the fact that they talk about math literacy as a civil right, not just something that's nice to have, but that all students should have. And if they haven't mastered, we need to figure out how we help them work through that. One of the things you'll find is that there is a section in there called Reasoning and Reading Like a Mathematician. And I'd like for you to pay close attention to that as you're going through. But then again, there are lots of other things that are in here about vocabulary, misconceptions, and so on. But just a little light reading sometime between now and the middle of January when we start back up. And like I said before, we really want you to be prepared to share strategies that you use. You know, we all benefit from the wisdom of the crowd itself, and what you bring in is going to make a big difference. There will be a post-session assignment, and we will post that once we get closer to the time for the actual presentation itself. It will be along the same lines as what you did this time, where it'll be short and for use in your classroom. You'll have the reflection form, and I have to tell you, I was so pleased that no one gave me a dissertation, but that you really did get down to the basics of how this process works as you go through, and how did it work within your classroom. In the meantime, you may want to take a look at a few different things. You can see that we have here just from a number of different sources, and you can check out any of them. Math in daily life may be something that you really enjoy. You can also check out the Math Dude, and also the Khan Academy as you're going through. So, having said that, a mind stretched to a new idea never goes back to its original dimensions, and that's what we really want to make sure that we do, is we stretch those minds of our students so that they can just keep growing and growing. Having said that, I'm going to ask you now if anyone has a question. If you want to raise your hand, I will be more than happy to unmute you and you can ask that question. Or if you want to type it into the question box, we can certainly do that as well. So, any questions, concerns? And I'm just looking to see if we have any hands raised. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So what I'm going to do, it is 2:51, and which means that we're going to finish up just a little bit earlier, which usually people appreciate that quite a bit. I will go back and record all of the people who have been watching with others, so that we make sure that we have everybody accounted for and moving through here. I want to thank you for all that you have done in implementing the different activities within the classroom itself. For sharing your thoughts through the reflection forms, and for your overall dedication to your students and what you are trying to do to help them as they're getting ahead. So having said that, I want to thank you for being with us, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving break. Also have a fantastic Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year. So thank you for coming with us, and have a great day, everyone.